The setting of the incident. Amidst the frigid February air in a quaint, picturesque town nestled in the heart of Massachusetts, Valentine's evening ticked by as most locals basked in the warmth of their homes. For Sarah Mitchell, a 48-year-old baker whose pies and pastries had become the pride of her little community, the night seemed uneventful. Her life, from the outside, had a charming simplicity to it. Mornings spent crafting her signature treats, afternoons delivering baked goods to loyal customers, and quiet evenings in her two-story brick home on Orchid Lane. But as the clock neared midnight on that frosty Valentine's Day of 2023, tragedy suddenly struck. Around 11:45 p.m., the calm was shattered. A sense of unease settled among a few neighbors who noticed flickering light and the smell of smoke wafting through the chilly air. Within moments, flames erupted from Sarah's upstairs window, licking the dark sky amidst the crackle of splintering wood. Charlie Henson, Sarah's elderly neighbor across the street, recalled how he first thought a festive Valentine's dinner had gone awry. "I figured maybe she'd left the oven on. She was always baking, but damn, not like this," Charlie said later in a stunned interview with local media. Calls to the 911 emergency hotline flooded in. Firefighters arrived swiftly, sirens wailing and cutting through the stillness of the February night. The fire was unlike any we'd seen in a home of that size. It enveloped the bedroom almost entirely before we could bring it under control, recalled Captain Jack Mansfield of the local fire department. To the shock of the first responders and the onlookers who gathered on the street, the fire wasn't the only tragedy that unfolded that night. After the flames were subdued in the early hours of February 15th, firefighters discovered the lifeless body of Sarah Mitchell in her upstairs bedroom. She lay motionless on her bed, partially obscured by a charred comforter and surrounded by the scorched remains of her once cozy personal sanctuary. But this wasn't just a case of smoke inhalation or a tragic accident. The level of damage to her body, coupled with the burn pattern on the furniture and walls, suggested something much darker. "We knew it immediately, this wasn't a regular fire," Captain Mansfield admitted later. "The burn marks were concentrated, almost deliberate. And Mrs. Mitchell, she had stab wounds, multiple ones, even through the areas that had burned." The community awoke that morning only to find their cherished baker's death splashed across the news. It wasn't a mere accident. What had seemed like a peaceful Valentine's Day had spiraled into a nightmare no one in the town could have expected. Her quaint bakery stood shuttered, its window decorations celebrating love and warmth seeming almost mockingly out of place against the grim reality of her demise. Sarah Mitchell's death, alongside the suspicious circumstances surrounding the fire, would set into motion an investigation both chilling and unforgettable. That peaceful February night in Massachusetts, the glow of hearts and roses on windows across town, would soon be remembered not for romantic dinners or heartfelt gifts, but as the backdrop for a grotesque crime that disturbed the core of the tight-knit community. Who or what could have turned Sarah's serene life into such a devastating tragedy? This was the question that began to gnaw at everyone in town as detectives arrived to meticulously comb through the ashes and try to piece together the truth. The horrific scene. When the fire that had engulfed Sarah Mitchell's second-floor bedroom was finally extinguished in the early hours of February 15, 2023, the fire department began assessing the damage. What awaited them was a grim sight that immediately set off alarms in their minds. Amidst the charred remains of what used to be a cozy personal sanctuary, firefighters stumbled upon the lifeless body of Sarah Mitchell. She sat slumped on her bed, partially concealed beneath a half-burned comforter, her once vibrant face now pale and unresponsive. The walls were blackened with soot, and the air still crackled with the haunting remnants of heat. Shattered glass and burned-out debris littered the floor, and the acrid smell of melted fabric and scorched wood clung to the oxygen, piercing the lungs of those who dared to breathe in. Yet within that destruction, certain details stood out, details that made the situation far more sinister than a house fire gone out of control. Captain Jack Mansfield of the local fire department recounted the discovery with a hardened expression during later interviews. "We were trained to react to fires and find ways to salvage what we could, but this was different. My gut told me right away this wasn't just a tragic accident. Every firefighter in that room could feel it too, something was off. For starters, the condition of the body wasn't consistent with a fire death caused by smoke inhalation or heat. The medical team called to the scene quickly noted deep lacerations visible on Sarah's upper chest and neck, even though sections of her body had been partially scorched. The comforter covering her torso was destroyed in uneven patches, revealing not just the damage inflicted by flames, but puzzling burn marks concentrated in unnatural patterns. Lieutenant Amy Harper, one of the crime scene investigators first on location, remembered the eeriness of the environment. When you walk into a room that's been burned like this, it's chaotic. Fabric disintegrated, walls scorched, objects barely recognizable. But this fire felt designed, if you can believe it. It was planned. There was intent. Amid the destruction, other anomalies raised red flags for detectives as well. One of the windows situated near the bed was found slightly ajar, a peculiar observation, given that Massachusetts was experiencing sub-zero temperatures that night. What perplexed investigators even more was the absence of any visible forced entry marks on the front door. The lock was intact, its structure pristine, suggesting that if someone had entered, they either had access to a key or had used an alternative route. Further defying explanation was the family dog, an aging German shepherd named Max, who was known to bark fiercely at any unfamiliar visitors. On that fateful night, neighbors reported nothing but silence. When firefighters arrived, Max had been found cowering quietly in the corner of the kitchen, unharmed yet unusually subdued. The possibility that the perpetrator had found a way to neutralize the animal's instincts only added to the growing list of questions. The bedroom itself was a study in chaos. The bed linens, now remnants of ash, bore faint traces of accelerant, a detail that would later confirm investigators' suspicions of arson. The bedside table, despite its disarray, astonishingly still housed Sarah's wedding ring, a diamond necklace, and a small stack of cash under a scorched lamp. The absence of theft, paired with the deliberate ferocity of the crime, ruled out the motive of robbery almost immediately. "Our instinct took us beyond the fire," said Harper. The stab wounds, the signs of a struggle, the concentrated scorch marks, it all screamed something far more calculated than a heat-related tragedy. Someone wanted to destroy evidence to make sure no clarity could be found. Adding to the peculiarities was the missing cell phone. Normally an inseparable part of Sarah's daily routine, her phone was nowhere to be found amidst the wreckage. Yet other electronics, including a laptop that sat undisturbed on a downstairs counter, remained untouched. Detective Elliot Chambers pondered the possibility that the device had been taken not for its value, but for the secrets it might contain. Call logs, messages, emails, information about someone perhaps. As daylight crept over the quiet Massachusetts town, investigators continued their painstaking examination of the crime scene. Scattered among the fragments were traces of something almost imperceptible, drops of blood that didn't belong to Sarah. A small streak ran along the floorboards near the window, terminating just beneath the pane that remained cracked open. The detail was minuscule, but for forensic teams, it was a lifeline to unmasking the truth. Finally, one of the most haunting facets of the space was its silence. The very room, once bursting with warmth and life, now stood eerily still. Underneath the devastation, the investigators could piece together the narrative of the fight that had transpired. A life snuffed out violently, furiously, and with a chilling detachment. From the first responders to seasoned detectives, every professional in that house could feel the grim enormity of what had occurred. A grotesque crime hidden beneath a veil of smoke and flame, one that no amount of gasoline could burn away completely. Standing over the bed, Captain Mansfield whispered half to himself and half to his team, "This wasn't just murder. This was personal." Unusual clues. As investigators cataloged the scene of Sarah Mitchell's tragic death, the jarring inconsistencies they found began forming a puzzle that seemed both intricate and chilling. The more they dove into the details, the clearer it became that this was no nightmare of random misfortune or coincidental disaster. It was an orchestrated tragedy. Yet the clues left behind spoke only in whispers, forcing detectives to lean into their instincts and peel back the layers of confusion piece by piece. The first anomaly, an eerie one, was her dog Max. The German shepherd, notoriously territorial and fiercely loyal to Sarah, had been known to bark at even slight disturbances in the neighborhood. Neighbors had always joked about how Max seemed like the town's best security system, an early warning alarm that never failed. And yet, on the night of the murder, Max didn't make a sound, not a bark, not a whimper. He was discovered huddled in the corner of the kitchen, uninjured physically, but visibly shaken. Was the dog silent somehow, sedated? Or was it possible that Max didn't react at all because the person who entered the house was someone familiar to him? "He wasn't tied up, he wasn't hurt, and he didn't bark," noted Detective Amy Harper while reviewing the scene. "It paints a strange picture, doesn't it? Someone wanted access without raising an alarm, and for some reason the dog complied." Adding another layer of mystery was the house's front door, which remained securely locked. Firefighters had to force it open when they arrived, and even after the chaos had subsided, no signs of tampering or a break-in could be found. The lock hadn't been jimmied, nor was the doorframe damaged in the slightest. Whoever entered the house had clearly not done so in haste or under duress. "This wasn't your run-of-the-mill forced entry," said Lieutenant Paul Jennings, the lead investigator. "The front door was locked tight, no scratches, no broken glass, nothing. This means the person either had a key, knew the code, or—" he paused, grimacing. "They came in through another point of entry." That point of entry quickly became a focal point in the investigation, the upstairs window. Though most of the house bore the marks of the intense fire, the investigators found clear signs that the second-floor window had been broken open from the outside. The trim along the sill bore faint smudges, likely fingerprints, from someone gripping tightly while pulling themselves inside. More disturbingly, the ledge beneath the window bore a light imprint of something investigators suspected to be a footprint. Analysis of the size and shape suggested the print belonged to a men's boot, further unraveling Sarah's serene facade of safety. But the mysteries didn't end there. The bedroom itself told a conflicting story. Key valuables, Sarah's engagement ring, a small stack of cash, and a gold necklace, remained untouched on her scorched bedside table. If robbery had been the motive, why would the perpetrator leave these items behind? And yet, the absence of her cell phone brought another set of questions. "We all know how attached people are to their phones," Detective Harper said during a later briefing. "Sarah took her phone everywhere. She used it for business, personal calls, you name it. So how does everything else valuable stay put, but the one thing that could track communications or give us clues just disappears?" The missing phone painted a portrait of purpose. It wasn't hard to imagine why someone might want to take the device. Cell phones are the modern-day vaults for personal secrets. Call logs, text messages, GPS data, confidential files. Whoever had taken the phone likely did so to erase some kind of connection, or remove incriminating evidence that could link them to Sarah. Then there was the fire itself. Fires meant to destroy evidence are rarely clean or calculated, and this one was no exception. While most of the room was scorched, the pattern of burn marks told a deliberate and intentional story. Accelerant, likely gasoline, had been poured directly on key sections of the room, focusing on the bed where Sarah's body was found. Yet oddly enough, the fire hadn't consumed everything as intended. Investigators noted uneven scorch patterns, likely due to poor ventilation, which left portions of the crime scene relatively preserved. The fire wasn't random, it was targeted. This person knew exactly where they wanted to pour the fuel and why, explained Dr. Margaret Lane, a criminal behavior analyst brought onto the case. But fires are unpredictable and messy, and in this instance they failed to completely erase the evidence they were trying so hard to destroy. Another curious detail emerged upon closer inspection: the knife wounds. Before her body had been partially burned, Sarah sustained brutal, deliberate attacks. Forensic analysis confirmed that she had been stabbed over 30 times, primarily in the chest and neck. This wasn't a single act of impulse. It was the work of someone emotionally charged or deeply motivated, possibly with a personal vendetta. Further examination of the crime scene delivered more unanswered questions. Despite the chaotic appearance of the room, no signs of an extended struggle were found elsewhere in the house. There were no overturned furniture in the living room, no scattered items on the stairwell, nothing to suggest a chase or conflict spanning multiple areas of the home. It seemed that every horrific act had been confined to Sarah's bedroom. Was this because the killer knew precisely where she would be? And then there were the faint blood traces, a trail barely noticeable to the untrained eye. Leading from the bed to the partially open window, the drops didn't seem to match the copious amounts of blood Sarah herself had lost. "It's small, but it's there," said Harper, pointing to the crimson specks on the wooden floor during a briefing. "This could belong to someone else. The killer might have been injured, but we won't know until we get DNA results back." The picture that had been forming was fragmented, unsettling, and filled with contradictions. There were elements of rage, seen in the multiple stab wounds, but also a chilling level of control, demonstrated by the meticulous attempt to destroy evidence. The lack of valuables taken suggested the crime wasn't impulsive, nor motivated by greed. The unresponsive dog and untouched front door hinted at a level of familiarity the perpetrator might have had with the victim. All these clues, from the open window to the absent phone, painted a strange and incomplete narrative. One thing, however, became alarmingly clear. Whoever was responsible knew Sarah Mitchell, and they wanted to ensure that their brutal act left as little clarity as possible. The initial investigation. The news of Sarah Mitchell's death sent shockwaves through the small Massachusetts town, a place where serious crimes, let alone murders, were almost unheard of. By the morning of February 15, 2023, detectives and police officers had cordoned off the once cozy home on Orchid Lane. The driveway, now marked with yellow tape, was surrounded by curious onlookers, neighbors exchanging hushed whispers of disbelief. For them, Sarah wasn't just another resident, she was a beloved figure, the cheerful baker who knew most people by name, and always had a kind word to share alongside her famed cinnamon rolls. Detective Elliot Chambers, a seasoned investigator in charge of the case, arrived on the scene with a heavy sigh, trying to ready himself for what was sure to be a complex case. Middle-aged lady, no signs of forced entry, locked front door, he muttered to his rookie partner, Detective Laura Simmons, as they stepped through the scorched front doorway. Everything about this screams personal. Laura nodded, her notepad at the ready, and looked around. The house was eerily silent, save for the faint static crackle of charred wood settling upstairs. The bedroom, where the fire originated, was blackened with soot, a grim reminder of the violent tragedy that had unfolded there just hours earlier. But one detail of the crime stood out sharply to the detectives: the stab wounds found on Sarah Mitchell's body. 30 stab wounds, Chambers muttered, flipping through preliminary notes from the coroner. That's a whole lot of rage, or a lot of fear. Either way, someone was mad enough or desperate enough to make sure she didn't get back up. The first priority was to comb through Sarah's inner circle, family, employees, and acquaintances. As was procedure, the investigation started with interviewing those closest to her, beginning with Robert Mitchell, Sarah's 24-year-old son, who lived with her in the house. He was the one who alerted the authorities after discovering the fire. Sitting at the station, Robert looked visibly shaken, dark circles under his eyes and his hands trembling as he answered questions. I was asleep downstairs," Robert stammered, clutching his coffee cup tightly as Laura took notes. "I woke up because the smoke, it was so strong. At first I thought Mom left something burning in the oven again, but when I got to the stairs, I saw it. Flames." He paused, his voice breaking. "I called for her but she didn't answer. I yelled, ran outside, and called 911. Laura leaned forward, her voice soft but probing. "Did you hear anything unusual before you went to bed? Footsteps, voices, maybe a door opening or closing?" Robert shook his head firmly. "Nothing. It was completely quiet. I was exhausted from work and went to bed early, that's all." Still, Chambers couldn't ignore a feeling that something about Robert's account seemed too clean. The absence of noise, the silent dog, the rapid escalation of the fire, it all pointed to deliberate action. "Your mom, did she have any enemies? Anyone she might have argued with recently?" Chambers asked. Robert hesitated, looking away for a moment. "Not really. I mean, Mom was tough in business, you know. She didn't let anyone push her around. She had some disagreements with people, but nothing serious." His voice dropped. "Nothing that would make anyone want to do this, at least." "Disagreements?" Laura prompted. "With who?" Robert shrugged unhelpfully. "Vendors, other bakers, sometimes customers. She was always fair, but she didn't tolerate nonsense." With no concrete motive from Robert's testimony, detectives turned their attention to Sarah's professional dealings. Her small bakery, while a staple in the community, wasn't without its controversy. Sarah had a reputation for being fiercely competitive with other bakers in town. Several had complained over the years of her undercutting prices or swooping in to secure wholesale contracts with a ruthless sense of business acumen. Some of her competitors were not shy about sharing their frustrations. "She acted so nice, like she was everyone's friend," one local baker remarked during an informal interview with police. "But the truth is, she was cutthroat when it came to business. She didn't care if you went under, as long as she got the contract." Chambers furrowed his brow, scribbling this down. "Okay, so we're not looking at a robbery. It's more likely this was someone she crossed in business or someone who had a grudge." Laura nodded in agreement. "What about her employees? It's not uncommon for workplace disputes to escalate. The bakery only had 2 part-time staff members who worked the front counter. both of whom were quickly interviewed and cleared of suspicion. However, further digging revealed Sarah had fired one of her employees, Christopher White, 3 years earlier for allegedly stealing money from the register. Despite his termination and the accusations against him, Sarah never pursued legal action. According to a former co-worker, Christopher didn't take it well. He was furious, the co-worker had told investigators. He felt like Sarah ruined his life. Told anyone who'd listened that she owed him more respect, more money. That was the last I heard of him. This revelation placed Christopher White firmly on the detective's radar. A background check showed that he'd since moved out of state, but recent credit card transactions indicated he had returned to Massachusetts just weeks prior to Sarah's murder. If Christopher harbored resentment for Sarah, he could be a strong suspect, but additional threads needed to be pulled before jumping to conclusions. While potential suspects and motives began piling up, physical evidence at the scene added its own mysteries to the list. Forensic teams confirmed that an accelerant, most likely gasoline, had been used to ignite the fire. The burn patterns suggested someone had directly poured fuel over the bed where Sarah's body was found. Intriguingly, shards of glass near the second-floor window contained traces of skin oil, indicating that the window had been opened or tampered with manually. Preliminary DNA tests began, though results would take days to process. Meanwhile, the disappearance of Sarah's cell phone loomed as a major clue. Using geolocation pings from Sarah's service provider, detectives discovered the phone had last emitted a signal from a coffee shop 5 miles away, just hours after the murder. Surveillance footage from the coffee shop confirmed their worst fears. A man wearing a baseball cap had tossed a phone resembling Sarah's into a trash can and quickly exited the premises. Though his face wasn't fully visible, his build matched Christopher White. Chambers let out a long exhale as he reviewed this new piece of evidence. So we've got a missing cell phone, a fire that was clearly arson, a window someone climbed through, and at least one suspect with a motive who just so happens to be back in town. This thing is officially a mess. Laura tapped her pen thoughtfully on her notepad. It's more than a mess, it's methodical. Someone planned this. This isn't just some crime of passion. They knew how to break in, how to stage the scene, and they had a reason to silence Sarah. Which means, we're looking for 2 things now, Chambers said. Who had the hatred to kill Sarah Mitchell, and who had the brains to think they could get away with it? As the detectives left the Mitchell home, one thing was certain. The investigation was just beginning to unravel, and it was clear that uncovering the truth would take patience, precision, and the sharpest detective work they could muster. Business conflicts. As detectives began digging into Sarah Mitchell's life, they quickly realized that her seemingly idyllic reputation as the town's beloved baker wasn't without its complications. While she was admired by many in the community for her warm demeanor and talent in creating mouth-watering pies, her business dealings told a different story. A story filled with sharp competition, cutthroat tactics, and unresolved animosities. On the surface, Sarah's Bakery appeared to be the perfect example of a small-town success story. Over the years, she had transformed her humble storefront into a must-visit destination for locals and out-of-towners alike. Customers especially loved her cinnamon rolls and handcrafted seasonal pies. But, as the saying goes, success often attracts enemies, and for Sarah, the world of running a small business was anything but sweet. For starters, Sarah had a reputation for being fiercely protective of her bakery's dominance in town. Several local business owners and other bakers had accused her of undercutting prices to drive competitors out or scooping up exclusive wholesale contracts from local suppliers, leaving others scrambling to make ends meet. While Sarah's determination might have been praised in a larger corporate environment, in a small town like theirs, it was seen by some as ruthless. She wasn't as innocent as people want to believe, said Diane Carter, the owner of a rival pastry shop located just a block away from Sarah's bakery. There were times when supply trucks would suddenly stop coming to us. Later we'd find out Sarah had swooped in and negotiated a better deal, effectively cutting us out. It's business, sure, but in a place like this it stings. Diane wasn't the only one who felt Sarah's competitive side. Interviews with 3 other small business owners described similar experiences, ranging from price wars to bidding for contracts that Sarah somehow always managed to win. These conflicts didn't always remain private either. At least 2 of the disputes boiled over into public confrontations during community events, leaving witnesses with the impression that Sarah was willing to defend her turf, no matter the cost. Detectives interviewed Michael Parson, a local florist who often collaborated with Sarah's bakery during holidays for joint gift baskets. His perspective on Sarah was mixed. Look, Sarah was tough. I'd call it assertive. She knew what she wanted and she wasn't afraid to make demands, sometimes unreasonable ones. I know a Christmas season 3 years ago nearly ended our partnership because she wanted every floral arrangement from my shop to feature her bakery branding, said it was about presentation. But really it was a way to overshadow everyone else involved. But, he added reluctantly, she wasn't outright cruel. Pushy, sure, but not cruel. People respected her because she worked insanely hard. That doesn't mean they liked her. Indeed, one of the most contentious relationships Sarah had in town was with a vendor named Carl Maloney, who supplied fresh dairy products to many local businesses. Carl had been delivering to Sarah's bakery for over a decade, but detectives learned that their business relationship took a sour turn about a year before her death. Carl accused Sarah of withholding payments for nearly 2 months during a cash flow issue at her bakery, which led to a heated argument that allegedly took place right outside her shop. She made it seem like it was some kind of mistake, Carl told detectives when he was questioned, his face a mixture of lingering bitterness and guilt. But I knew better. She was holding back on me to secure a sweeter deal with someone else. After I kept pestering her for my money, she finally paid up, but not before acting like I was the one being unreasonable. I'll admit I was furious with her for a while, but kill her? No, I wouldn't stoop that low. Carl wasn't alone in harboring frustration towards Sarah. As investigators broadened their scope, they came across another business owner, Angela Fields, who owned a small catering company. It turned out that Sarah's bakery and Angela's catering company had competed for months to win a major wedding contract for the wealthiest family in town. Angela ultimately lost the bid, reportedly by a significant margin. She later accused Sarah of spreading rumors that Angela's food hygiene standards were subpar, an allegation Angela denied fervently. "That woman," Angela said during her interview with detectives, her hands clenched into fists. "She embarrassed me, flat out undercut my business, then smiled sweetly like she didn't know what had happened. When she stole that wedding out from under me, it wasn't just business, it was personal. Everyone knew it." While these accusations painted Sarah as a fierce and sometimes divisive competitor, it wasn't entirely clear to detectives whether such business feuds provided a concrete motive for murder. Many of these conflicts, no matter how heated, had occurred months or even years before her death. Could old grievances really have escalated into such violence? Or was there someone who had been harboring a grudge far longer than anyone realized? Adding to the intrigue was Sarah's habit of keeping certain details of her financial dealings close to the chest. Several competitors and former vendors noted that she conducted sensitive negotiations in private, even going to the point of switching supplier contracts without warning. This secretive approach earned her respect among some business owners, but it also created suspicion among those who felt blindsided by her maneuvers. "It's not like she advertised what she was doing," explained Cheryl Grant, another small business owner in town, "but it didn't take a genius to figure out she was always trying to stay one step ahead of everyone else. If someone felt like they'd been played, I wouldn't blame them for holding some resentment. But murder? That's extreme." As detectives compiled these testimonies, they began to see conflicting sides of Sarah Mitchell. To many, she was the successful and driven entrepreneur whose drive was something to admire. But to others, she was calculating, manipulative, and unafraid to play hardball if it meant protecting her position in the market. With so many business conflicts laid out in front of them, narrowing down suspects became even more challenging. "Here's what we know," Detective Chambers summarized during a late-night deliberation with his team. "Sarah wasn't a saint, but she wasn't a villain either. She was just competitive. But if someone felt like she'd crossed a line, if someone felt stuck because of her business practices, that's the kind of resentment that could fester. We need to figure out who carried a grudge long enough to kill over it." And so, the search for Sarah Mitchell's killer continued. With every new lead pulled from her tangled network of business confrontations, detectives began to understand one thing clearly. While Sarah may have been a baker, her professional life was anything but sugar-coated. Potential suspects. As detectives delved deeper into the investigation, a number of potential suspects began surfacing, each with their own motives, grievances, and ties to Sarah Mitchell. While Sarah was loved by many in the community, her determination, assertive personality, and hard-edged business tactics had earned her a fair share of enemies over the years. The challenge for the detectives became determining who among them had both the motive and the opportunity to commit such a brutal and calculated crime. Christopher White, the disgruntled ex-employee. Among the names that stood out most prominently was one Christopher White, a former employee of Sarah's bakery with a deeply troubled past. Christopher had worked for Sarah years earlier, but their professional relationship ended on a sour note after Sarah fired him in 2020. The official reason for his termination was theft. He had been caught embezzling money from the bakery's cash register over the course of several months. Though Sarah opted not to press charges at the time, the firing left Christopher humiliated and resentful. According to statements from former co-workers, Christopher did not handle his dismissal well. He had reportedly badmouthed Sarah to anyone who would listen, painting her as a controlling and manipulative boss who didn't appreciate his hard work. On more than one occasion, he was overheard saying that Sarah had sabotaged his life and that one day she'd regret treating him like trash. He wanted revenge. You could feel the anger dripping off his words whenever he talked about her, said Claire Morgan, another ex-employee, during her interview with detectives. But back then, I didn't think he had the guts to actually do anything. I thought it was just talk. Detectives ran a background check on Christopher and discovered a history of volatile behavior. After losing his job at the bakery, he struggled to find steady work, moving from one low-paying job to another and racking up multiple misdemeanors for petty theft and disorderly conduct. What caught their attention, however, was evidence that Christopher had recently returned to town after years of living out of state. His credit card transactions revealed purchases at a gas station near Sarah's home just days before her death. Witness accounts from local residents placed him in the vicinity during the week leading up to the fire. When detectives attempted to locate him for questioning, they found his apartment empty, a clear sign that he was on the move. "This guy has both motive and opportunity," Detective Elliot Chambers said, pinning Christopher's photo to the department's corkboard. "He's angry at Sarah, he's desperate, and now he's suspiciously off the grid. He doesn't just walk away from this without us having a conversation." Carl Maloney, the wronged vendor. Another key suspect was Carl Maloney, the dairy supplier who had a history of conflicts with Sarah over late payments and business disputes. While Carl publicly denied harboring any ill intent toward Sarah, detectives couldn't ignore the rancor in his voice when he described their professional dealings. "She burned me more than once," Carl had admitted during his interview. "Her bakery was my biggest contract and she knew it. She used that leverage to squeeze every last concession out of me. I felt like I was barely breaking even by the time all was said and done. But I stuck with it because, well, business is business." Detectives found it notable that Carl was the last vendor to deliver goods to the bakery before Sarah's death. His alibi for the night of the murder, a quiet evening at home, was corroborated by his wife, but something about his demeanor struck Detective Laura Simmons as overly rehearsed. "Every time we pressed him about his relationship with Sarah, it felt like he was holding something back," Laura noted in her report. "I can't tell whether it's guilt or frustration, but there's definitely more to the story than he's letting on." Angela Fields, the rival caterer with a personal grudge. Angela Fields, a catering business owner who had clashed with Sarah over a lucrative wedding contract, also found herself on the detective's radar. Angela had lost the bid to Sarah after months of bitter competition, and tensions escalated when rumors began circulating that Sarah had spread damaging allegations about Angela's food safety practices. "She destroyed my reputation," Angela claimed heatedly during her interview. "I don't know how she slept at night after pulling something like that. All I did was try to run my business and she turned it into a blood sport. People in this town still look at me like I'm unsanitary, even though there's no truth to any of it." Angela's anger was palpable, but when pressed about her whereabouts on the night of Sarah's death, she provided a solid alibi. Surveillance footage also confirmed that she had been working a catering gig 10 miles away during the time frame in question, ruling her out as a direct participant in the crime. "Honestly, I'm relieved she's gone," Angela admitted bluntly. "But if you're looking at me as a suspect, you're wasting your time. I didn't need Sarah gone to rebuild my business. I could have done that all on my own." Loose ends and the missing cell phone. While Christopher White quickly emerged as the primary suspect, detectives couldn't completely rule out other individuals in Sarah's orbit. From disgruntled competitors to burned business partners, the list of possibilities remained stubbornly long. The evidence, however, consistently pointed police back to Christopher. The discovery of Sarah's missing cell phone added weight to their suspicions. Geolocation data showed that the phone had last pinged from a coffee shop 5 miles from her home, hours after the fire broke out. Surveillance footage showed a man matching Christopher's build, disposing of what appeared to be Sarah's phone in the shop's trash before quickly leaving the premises. When investigators recovered the phone, their hopes for a quick resolution dimmed. The device had been wiped clean, likely by someone who knew it could contain incriminating information. Still, forensic technicians promised to comb through whatever fragments of data remained, hoping for a breakthrough. A mounting case. As the pieces of the case began to fall into place, Christopher's guilt seemed increasingly probable. His financial difficulties, his history of hostility toward Sarah, and his suspicious activity around the time of her murder painted a dark picture. But detectives knew they needed more evidence, more witnesses, and ideally, Christopher himself. "It's all starting to add up," Chambers said during a briefing with his team. "He's angry, he's desperate, and he's been lingering around just long enough to set this whole thing into motion. But suspect doesn't mean convicted. Let's find him and get the hard truth out of him." With a warrant issued for Christopher White's arrest, the hunt was officially on. The detectives were determined to bring closure to Sarah's grieving family and to ensure that whoever was responsible for the crime answered for their actions. The town, once quiet and serene, held its breath in anticipation as the investigation pushed forward, and the net tightened around its most likely suspect. The killer's signature. While investigators searched for leads in Sarah Mitchell's murder, they began uncovering distinct and disturbing details. A trail of evidence that hinted at the mindset, preparation, and characteristics of the person responsible. This wasn't just a clumsy crime of opportunity or reckless outburst of rage. The execution of the crime, as grisly as it was, bore calculated elements of planning and precision, and in those details, detectives found the killer's signature. The point of entry, a calculated move. From the beginning, the upstairs window stood out as a crucial clue. Situated on the second floor directly above the backyard, the window's location made it unlikely for a casual intruder to have used it unless they were familiar with the house. Upon careful inspection, the wooden frame of the window showed signs of forced entry, scratches consistent with a prying tool like a crowbar, but these marks were subtle, as if the intruder had taken care to avoid obvious damage. Fingerprint smudges were lightly visible along the window trim, confirming that someone had climbed through. What detectives found most chilling, however, was the footprint left on the windowsill below. The size and pattern suggested a men's boot, likely worn by someone strong enough to hoist themselves through a narrow space with ease. The placement of the footprint also indicated that the intruder had landed with deliberate precision. This wasn't a panicked act, it was a controlled maneuver. "This wasn't someone bumbling their way in," remarked Detective Laura Simmons as she stood near the window during an early walkthrough of the scene. "They scouted this out, they knew where to enter without being seen, and they knew how to make it quick." What set the act apart even further was its boldness. On February nights in Massachusetts, temperatures were well below freezing. Anyone performing such a physical act at that time of night, climbing into a dark second-story window while avoiding detection, needed to be determined and in decent physical shape. The fact that no neighbors heard any unusual noises implied the perpetrator was experienced in maintaining a low profile. The mark of violence, overkill, as a calling card. Perhaps the most glaring hallmark of the killer's mindset was the sheer violence inflicted upon Sarah Mitchell. 30 stab wounds to her chest and neck. This kind of overkill was far from typical. It suggested unrestrained rage, the kind fueled by a deeply personal grievance. Forensic experts noted that the pattern of the stab wounds indicated not just anger but a frightening level of intent. "This isn't just someone trying to incapacitate a victim," said Dr. Margaret Lane, a criminal behavior analyst brought onto the case. "This is someone ensuring the victim suffers, or ensuring something they represent is completely destroyed." Crimes of this nature, so vicious and prolonged, are often committed by someone who feels betrayed or slighted in some way. While some of the wounds appeared deep and fatal, others looked less precise, as though the killer had kept going beyond necessity. What struck investigators the most was the spacing of the wounds, tight, deliberate strikes concentrated directly at vital areas, paired with wild slashes that indicated a loss of control. "Everything about this screams emotion," added Detective Simmons while reviewing the preliminary autopsy report. "But at the same time, it shows planning. I think they came here knowing exactly what they wanted to do." The fire, a mask for motive. The fire that consumed Sarah's bedroom was another critical part of the killer's signature. Investigators quickly ruled out a natural or accidental cause based on the discovery of accelerant residue on the bed. Gasoline, likely poured over Sarah's body and the mattress, had been used to ignite the flames. The concentrated burn pattern on the mattress, along with scorch marks climbing up the walls, left little doubt that the fire was meant to destroy evidence. But like much of this case, the fire raised more questions than it answered. If the killer had planned this in such detail, why hadn't the fire consumed the entire room? Had they underestimated how difficult it would be for flames to spread through the oxygen-starved space? Or was their intent something else entirely? Perhaps an attempt to stage the crime scene, to mislead investigators by masking the real motive. "One thing's for sure," remarked Captain Jack Mansfield of the fire investigation team, "this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. They didn't just light a match and hope for the best. Bringing gasoline? That means they planned for it. They wanted that room, and everything in it, erased." Despite the deliberate use of the fire, the killer's lack of expertise became evident in its outcome. Flawed ventilation around the windows and furniture left key parts of the scene semi-intact, including traces of accelerant and certain unburned items, Sarah's wedding ring for instance, as well as the edge of a comforter that covered her body. The silent witness, the dog's peculiar behavior. Among the many oddities of the crime scene was Max, Sarah's aging German shepherd. Max was known for his aggressive barking whenever strangers approached the house, a fact attested to by nearly every neighbor. Yet, on the night of Sarah's murder, Max didn't make a sound. When firefighters entered the home, they found him cowering in the kitchen, unharmed but acting as if he'd been traumatized. This behavior led investigators to consider two disturbing possibilities. Either Max had been subdued through some means, a sedative perhaps, or he simply didn't see the intruder as a threat. The latter would suggest that the killer was someone familiar to Max, a chilling thought that began to shape the profile of the suspect. "Dogs don't lie," Detective Chambers stated bluntly during an early briefing. "If Max didn't attack, then this guy either knew how to handle animals, or Max had been around him before." The missing cell phone, a calculated cover-up. One of the most perplexing clues in the investigation involved Sarah's missing cell phone. Unlike cash or other valuables that remained untouched in the house, the phone was gone, an absence that seemed far too intentional to be coincidence. Investigators believed it wasn't taken for its monetary value, but for the data it contained. Call logs, texts, recent emails, any of these could point directly to the killer, particularly if they had been in contact with Sarah in the days leading up to her death. The geolocation data from the phone led detectives to a coffee shop 5 miles away, where surveillance footage captured a man matching Christopher White's build, discarding the device in a trash can. When the phone was later recovered, investigators found it had been wiped clean of data, a move that would have required someone well-versed in technology or sufficiently motivated to cover their tracks. A disturbing precision. From the entry point to the overkill violence, to the fire and the missing phone, the details painted an unsettling picture of a killer who was both emotionally charged and methodical. While they had left behind a trail of physical evidence, footprints, fingerprint smudges, traces of accelerant, it was clear they had taken significant steps to control or destroy anything that could link them to the crime. "What we're looking at," Chambers concluded, staring at the accumulating evidence on the corkboard, "isn't just someone angry enough to kill. This person has a plan, they're careful, they're obsessed, and they didn't just want Sarah Mitchell dead, they wanted her erased." The profile that emerged was dark, someone capable of extreme violence but also intelligent, calculated, and measured in their actions. And while the signature they left behind was full of contradictions, one thing became painfully evident. This wasn't their first thoughtless act. Whoever had done this had prepared for it, and they believed they could get away with it. Tracing the missing cell phone. The missing cell phone became one of the most critical pieces of evidence for detectives trying to untangle the mystery of Sarah Mitchell's death. Unlike other valuables left behind at the scene, her engagement ring, jewelry, and a small stack of cash, the absence of the phone stood out as a glaring anomaly. Forensic experts and investigators knew that the key to understanding the motive and possibly the identity of the killer might lie in the digital trail left behind by that small, indispensable device. From the beginning, detectives suspected that the phone wasn't taken by accident. Cell phones are modern treasure troves of information. Call logs, locations, text messages, emails, and contact lists, all of which could provide a window into Sarah's recent activity and, more importantly, her connections. Whoever had taken it seemed to understand its enormous potential as evidence. But even the most careful criminals make mistakes, and for detectives, that one misstep was the opportunity they needed. The first break, a faint signal. As a routine part of the investigation, detectives reached out to Sarah's cell phone provider, requesting the last known location of the device. The results were troubling and intriguing. The phone had remained active for several hours after Sarah's death, pinging a cell tower nearly 5 miles away. Its final signal was traced to a busy coffee shop in the neighboring town, recorded at approximately 2:03 a.m., nearly 3 hours after the fire began raging in Sarah's bedroom. Detective Laura Simmons couldn't hide her excitement when the results came in. "If this was just a robbery or arson, why keep the phone, and why dump it in such a public place?" she asked aloud to no one in particular. "This guy was either panicked or trying to misdirect us. Either way, it's sloppy." With the location in hand, local officers were dispatched to the coffee shop where surveillance footage revealed a critical clue. The grainy security camera captured a man dressed in dark clothing and wearing a baseball cap entering the shop around 2 a.m. He appeared hurried, his movements quick and furtive. The timestamp showed him approaching a trash can by the entrance, where he discarded an object before leaving almost immediately. Detective Elliot Chambers scrutinized the footage with his team. "It's not crystal clear, but that build matches Christopher White. Look at the way he moves, he's trying to avoid being noticed. And why stop at a random coffee shop in the dead of night just to toss something?" The object in question, the cell phone, was retrieved by forensic technicians. Though burned and partially damaged, the phone remained intact enough to confirm it was Sarah Mitchell's. For detectives, it was both a victory and a frustrating setback. The device had been wiped clean of data. Whoever discarded it had made sure to erase its digital contents, creating yet another hurdle for investigators. The forensic challenge, scraping for clues. Despite the wipe, the forensic team wasn't ready to give up. Modern technology allows for incredible recovery capabilities, and while most criminals understand the basics of deleting data, very few know how to permanently erase it. Sarah's phone was sent to the state's cybercrime lab, where technicians combed through both its hardware and software for remnants of information. The data wipe wasn't amateur work, noted Jake Monroe, one of the lab's senior technicians, during his briefing to the investigative team. "Whoever did this either knows a thing or two about phones or went out of their way to research how to clear everything. But here's the thing about digital evidence. It's never really gone. There are fragments, shadows of activity that linger no matter how careful you are." Over the next few days, fragments of Sarah's digital life began to reappear. While full conversations and contact details couldn't be recovered, geolocation data from the phone's earlier history revealed some intriguing patterns. One discovery stood out. In the days leading up to Sarah's murder, the phone had pinged a location just 3 blocks from Christopher White's address. It wasn't definitive proof, but it strengthened the case against him. "Why was Sarah's phone anywhere near Christopher's place?" Laura Simmons asked, running her hands over the ever-growing evidence board. "He lives miles away from her bakery. It wasn't a random coincidence. Either he contacted her directly or—" She trailed off, looking at Chambers. "Or," Chambers finished, "he was keeping tabs on her." The disposal. Why a coffee shop? The decision to discard the phone at a coffee shop baffled investigators at first. Why not destroy it completely, or leave it somewhere isolated? The detectives built a theory. The killer likely hoped to mislead them. Dumping the device in a busy public space like a coffee shop might force police to consider other suspects or even create the impression that it was left by someone unrelated to the case. "It's like he wanted to muddy the waters," Chambers said during a late-night strategy meeting. "Throw us off his trail, make the phone seem insignificant, but the fact that we even have the phone is his first big mistake." The choice of location also revealed a hint of arrogance or desperation. By selecting a public place, the killer had to blend in and risk being seen. It exposed him in a way more careful criminals would have avoided, and while the surveillance footage wasn't sharp enough to give investigators a 100% visual ID, it was damning enough to point them even closer to Christopher White. Piecing together a narrative. As geolocation data provided some insight into Sarah's movements before her death, detectives started piecing together a timeline that implicated Christopher White further. The forensic team identified a brief call made from Sarah's cell phone the night before her murder. Though they couldn't recover the details of the conversation, It aligned with the approximate time Christopher's credit card transaction was flagged at a nearby gas station. "Best guess?" Simmons offered to the group. "He called her. Maybe he convinced her to meet him. Or maybe he showed up at her house unannounced. Either way, they had contact that night." Chambers nodded in agreement. It wouldn't take much. Just an excuse to talk, an apology, a promise to settle an old score. Then things go wrong, escalation happens, and here we are. Building pressure. The recovered digital fragments, surveillance footage, and Christopher White's established anger towards Sarah were slowly forming the backbone of the case against him. Still, without a direct confession or more concrete evidence, detectives knew they needed to keep digging. "This phone is the thread," Chambers told his team during their morning briefing. "We've pulled it far enough to lead us to Christopher, but not far enough to seal this case tight. Let's keep pulling." The team focused its efforts on Christopher's whereabouts leading up to Sarah's death. A deeper dive into his online activity revealed searches on how to wipe phones clean and articles on covering your tracks. Around the same time, purchases were made for gloves, gasoline, and a set of men's boots, the same kind linked to prints found on Sarah's windowsill. "It won't be long now," Simmons said quietly, her eyes fixed on the board covered in witness interviews, evidence photos, and snippets of recovered data. "This phone is going to put him away. We just need one more push." A turning point. The cell phone, once thought to be a dead end, had become the linchpin of the investigation. Not only had it provided a faint digital trail that strengthened suspicions against Christopher, but it had also revealed his lack of expertise in fully erasing evidence. For investigators, this mistake would prove crucial as they prepared to move in on their primary suspect. "This guy thought he was being smart," Chambers mused as the team assembled arrest plans. "But for someone who wanted everything erased, he left a hell of a trail in his wake." Apprehending the suspect. The walls were closing in on Christopher White. Over weeks of meticulous work, investigators had unraveled a trail of circumstantial evidence, physical clues and behavior patterns, all of which pointed directly at the disgruntled ex-employee of Sarah Mitchell. However, the detectives knew that suspicions and theories weren't enough. What they needed now was an airtight arrest and, ideally, a confession. Detective Elliot Chambers outlined the arrest plan during the morning briefing. "This isn't going to be simple," he began with his typically calm but firm tone. "Christopher White knows we're closing in. He's been dodging us, and there's no reason to believe he'll stop. If we want to bring this guy in, we need to be precise, deliberate, and quick. No mistakes." Detective Laura Simmons, seated beside Chambers, chimed in. "We've got enough for an arrest warrant. His movements that night, the wiped phone, the DNA analysis tying him to the window, but if he gets any hint we're coming for him, I have no doubt he'll bolt." Tracking his movements. By the time the warrant for Christopher's arrest was issued, detectives had already been monitoring his activity. Surveillance teams had been stationed outside his last known residence, a small, rundown apartment complex on the edge of town. His car, an older model Honda, had been seen sporadically parked outside, though neighbors stated they rarely saw Christopher himself. "He keeps to himself," one neighbor told detectives when questioned informally. "Doesn't talk much, but you get the sense he's angry about something. Always slamming doors, always avoiding eye contact." Over the course of their surveillance, detectives observed Christopher making occasional quick trips, mostly to gas stations and convenience stores. His body language betrayed his anxious state, constant glances over his shoulder, restless pacing near the car, and curt interactions with cashiers. "He knows we're after him," Laura Simmons remarked as she watched live footage from a surveillance vehicle. "Look at him. He's trying to act normal, but you can see it. He's jumpy as hell. He'll run the second he feels cornered." The final clue that set the wheels in motion for his capture came from a purchase made with Christopher's credit card at a convenience store near the train station, just outside the town limits. It was a one-way ticket purchased for a train heading out of Massachusetts. He was preparing to leave. "Is this guy really trying to disappear on a train of all things?" Chambers said dryly when the information came in. "Not exactly criminal mastermind behavior." Closing the net. The arrest operation. With Christopher's travel plans in hand, law enforcement acted swiftly. Officers from the Massachusetts State Police joined local detectives to form a tactical apprehension unit. The plan was straightforward. Intercept Christopher at the train station before he had the chance to board. Team members were assigned to multiple locations around the station, parking lots, entrances, terminals. No detail was left to chance. "This has to be clean," Chambers reminded the team as they prepared to move out. We don't want him slipping through our fingers, but we also don't want to spook the guy. He doesn't need time to think. He needs to know it's over as soon as we close in." Detectives Simmons and Chambers positioned themselves near the ticket counter while plainclothes officers blended into the waiting area. Meanwhile, 2 officers stood ready by the platform where Christopher's train was scheduled to depart. The tension was palpable as everyone waited for Christopher to arrive. Simmons kept her eyes locked on the entrance, tapping a pen in her hand to calm her nerves. "He's cutting it close," she muttered to Chambers as the departure time inched closer. "What if he smells us and bails?" "He'll show," Chambers replied confidently, though his posture betrayed his own unease. "He's desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. He wants to run, Laura. That's what's keeping him coming." At exactly 3:15 p.m., Christopher entered the station, his movements hurried and frantic. His eyes darted around the room, scanning the faces of bystanders, as though he sensed something wasn't right. For a brief moment he hesitated at the entrance. Was he rethinking his plan? Detectives held their breath as he shuffled forward, gripping a backpack slung over his shoulder. It wasn't until he headed toward the platform that Chambers gave the signal. "Let's move," he said firmly into his radio. The moment of capture. The burst of activity that followed was seamless. Christopher barely had time to react as officers closed in from every angle. Uniformed police intercepted him before he could take another step onto the platform. "Christopher White!" one of the officers called out. "Police! Stop right there! Put your hands where we can see them!" Christopher froze, his eyes wide with panic. For a split second he looked as if he might bolt, his feet shifted, his body visibly tensed, but the officers surrounding him left no room for escape. Slowly, he raised his hands. "What the hell is this?" he snapped, his voice shaking as 2 officers moved in to restrain him. "I didn't do anything! You got the wrong guy!" Detective Simmons stepped forward as Christopher was handcuffed, her badge glinting in the sunlight. "Yeah? Then you've got nothing to worry about," she said coolly, taking satisfaction in the flicker of fear that crossed his face. "Care to explain why you've been dodging us, or why we found Sarah Mitchell's phone connected to you?" Christopher's mouth opened to protest, but no words came out. He seemed to deflate, losing the bravado he had tried to cling to. As officers secured him, another officer searched the contents of Christopher's backpack. What they found inside only further cemented their case. A pair of heavy boots with faint traces of soot and charred material clinging to the soles. The tread on the boots matched the footprint left on Sarah Mitchell's windowsill. "Well, would you look at that?" Simmons said as she examined the boots with a raised eyebrow. "Looks like we're not going to have to beg for a confession after all." The ride to the station. On the drive back to the station, Christopher remained sullen and quiet, his gaze fixed on the dashboard in front of him. The officers didn't press him yet. There would be plenty of time for that in the interrogation room. But the atmosphere was heavy with the knowledge that they had captured their prime suspect. "I didn't mean," Christopher finally mumbled, breaking the silence. His voice was barely audible. "Didn't mean to what?" Simmons asked sharply from the passenger seat. Christopher swallowed hard but refused to elaborate. "You didn't mean to get caught," Chambers muttered under his breath. By the time the team returned to the station, the arrest had made its way through the grapevine of their small town. News of Christopher White's capture spread quickly, and for the first time in weeks, the people of the town dared to feel some relief. Preparing for the next step. Back at the station, Chambers felt the weight of the day's accomplishments as he filed the necessary paperwork for the arrest. "We've got him," he said to Simmons, though his tone remained cautious. "But this isn't over. We've got to get him talking. The evidence is strong, but if we want to close this case ironclad, we need the truth straight out of his mouth." Simmons nodded, leaning back against the desk. "He's scared. You can see it written all over him. It's only a matter of time before he cracks." And with that, the interrogation began. The detectives knew they weren't just pursuing justice for Sarah Mitchell. They were confronting the mind of a man whose actions and motives would prove to be as shocking as his crime. But for now, Christopher White, the once elusive shadow of their investigation, was no longer free, and it was only a matter of time before all the pieces fell into place. A shocking confession. Back at the station, Christopher White sat in the cold, sterile confines of the interrogation room. He was hunched over the table, his hands cuffed in front of him, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the air-conditioned chill. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting stark shadows across his face. Outside, detectives Elliot Chambers and Laura Simmons observed him through the two-way mirror, their expressions a combination of determination and cautious anticipation. "This guy's cracking, I can feel it," Simmons murmured, crossing her arms as she stared through the glass. "He's not built for this kind of pressure." He folded just getting into the car. Chambers nodded, but his voice was measured. "Maybe. But sometimes desperation can make a person unpredictable. We have to be careful how we play this. Push too hard and he might shut down altogether. Not hard enough. And he'll keep holding on to whatever story he thinks will save him." Simmons glanced at him. "Do you think he planned this all along? The murder, the fire, everything?" Chambers inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly. "I don't think he's a criminal mastermind, that's for sure. But he knew Sarah, he knew what he was doing that night, and my gut tells me it's personal. Let's find out just how personal." The interrogation begins. Chambers and Simmons entered the room with deliberate steps, their expressions neutral. Christopher barely looked up as they sat across from him. Between him and the detectives sat a folder containing the evidence, ominous, yet untouched for the moment. "Long night, Christopher?" Chambers began casually, leaning back in his chair as he studied the man in front of him. Christopher didn't respond right away, his fingers nervously twitching. After a long pause, he grumbled, "Why the hell am I here? I told you I didn't do anything." Simmons leaned forward, her gaze sharp but measured. "It's funny, Christopher. You didn't do anything, yet we've got your boots matching the footprint on Sarah Mitchell's windowsill. That's strike one. Then there's the camera footage. Your face is all over the coffee shop's surveillance dumping a phone you thought you'd wiped clean. That's strike two. You see where this is heading?" Christopher tensed, his jaw clenching. "I didn't kill her." His voice wavered slightly, more defensive than assertive. "Then why run?" Chambers interjected smoothly. "Why buy a one-way train ticket? Why not come talk to us when we started asking questions instead of dodging us at every turn?" Christopher sat silent, his eyes darting between the detectives and the table. "We know you were at her house," Simmons pressed, her tone tightening slightly. "We know you climbed through that window. You want to tell us why, or do you want us to tell you the story we've pieced together? Because I promise you, Christopher, if we have to tell it, you're not going to like the ending." The breaking point. The tension in the room was suffocating as Christopher shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For a moment it seemed like he was going to clam up again, but finally he exhaled in a shaky breath and muttered, Fine. I'll tell you, okay? Just stop with the damn courtroom speeches." Chambers leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice calm and even. "We're listening. Start at the beginning." Christopher swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the table. I didn't go there to hurt her. I swear I just wanted to talk to her." "Talk to her about what?" Simmons asked, narrowing her eyes. Christopher's fists tightened against the table. She ruined my life, okay? Took everything from me. I worked my ass off for her and she just threw me out like I was nothing. And then she acted like I was the problem, like I was trash." "You're talking about when she fired you," Chambers said. Christopher nodded quickly, a bitter chuckle escaping his lips. "Yeah, fired me. Accused me of stealing. I mean, was I skimming a little? Sure, but I needed it. I was drowning. And what did she do? She humiliated me in front of everyone. I lost my job, my friends, my reputation. Nobody would hire me after that." "And you've been carrying that anger ever since?" Simmons asked evenly. Christopher's voice cracked as he shot back. "Wouldn't you? Look, I've spent years trying to put my life back together, but it followed me everywhere. Sarah Mitchell and her perfect little bakery were always there in the back of my mind. Everyone loved her, but no one saw the side of her I did. She was ruthless. She just ruined me." The night of the crime. "So, you went to her house," Chambers prompted. "Why?" "To talk," Christopher insisted, though his voice wavered. "I just wanted to talk to her. I wanted to tell her how messed up my life was because of her. I wanted her to understand what she did." "And you thought breaking in through her window was the best way to do that?" Simmons asked, folding her arms. "She wouldn't have let me in if I knocked," Christopher said, his voice growing defensive again. "People like her. They don't listen to guys like me. She looks at everyone like they're below her. I wanted her to listen." "You didn't just talk, though, did you?" Chambers pressed, his tone harder now. "You killed her. Why, Christopher? What happened in that bedroom?" Tears began welling in Christopher's eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that, I swear. She started yelling at me, telling me I was pathetic, that I was a failure. Something just snapped. I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean to hurt her, but she wouldn't stop." "So you stabbed her," Simmons said bluntly. Christopher flinched at the word, his voice breaking. She grabbed something and I freaked out. I thought she was going to fight back. I didn't mean to. I lost control, okay? I didn't mean for it to go that far." 30 stab wounds isn't losing control, Simmons shot back, her voice steady but cold. That's overkill, that's rage, you wanted her dead, Christopher. The fire chambers leaned in now, his voice low and deliberate. You didn't just stop there though, did you? You set that fire. You had a can of gasoline ready. Call me crazy, but that sounds a lot like a plan. I didn't plan it, Christopher cried, his hands shaking violently. After it happened, I panicked. I didn't know what to do. The fire, I thought it would cover everything up. Make it look like an accident or something. I wasn't thinking straight. You were thinking straight enough to wipe her phone, Simmons countered. Thinking straight enough to throw it in a trash can miles away and buy a one-way train ticket. Christopher buried his face in his hands. I didn't want it to turn out like this. I just wanted her to pay for what she did to me. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in like lead. The confession concludes. Chambers finally broke the silence. You know this ends here, right? You killed Sarah Mitchell. You tried to erase everything, but here we are, Christopher. There's no erasing this. Christopher looked up at him, his tear-streaked face filled with defeat. I didn't mean for any of this. That's for the courts to decide, Simmons said coldly as she stood up. We're done here. As they left the room, Chambers turned to Simmons, his expression grim. Well, we've got it. A confession and enough evidence to back it up, but somehow it doesn't make this feel any less ugly. Simmons sighed. Because it is, Elliot. It's as ugly as it gets. A man destroyed his own life and someone else's over a grudge he couldn't let go of. It's just pathetic. And with that, they headed to finalize their case, knowing the shocking confession Christopher White had just delivered would soon echo through every courtroom and headline. For the small Massachusetts town, justice was finally within reach, but the scars of this crime would linger far longer than the courtroom proceedings. The act of arson and the killer's obscured motive. Arson is often seen as an act of chaos and panic, burning away evidence in a desperate attempt to erase the traces of another crime. But in the case of Sarah Mitchell's murder, the fire set by Christopher White held something far more sinister. It wasn't just an act of fear, it was a calculated decision layered with anger and desperation. From the way the fire was set to the exact execution of his plan, detectives began to unravel the psychology behind Christopher's decision to torch Sarah's bedroom after brutally stabbing her. Setting the scene, a fire designed to destroy evidence. It wasn't spur of the moment, Detective Elliot Chambers said flatly as he reviewed reports with the team. The guy didn't just light a match and hope for the best, he came with gasoline. That means he planned for this. Detective Laura Simmons nodded, flipping through a file detailing the burn patterns in Sarah's bedroom. It screams premeditation, she agreed. He poured the accelerant directly on the bed where her body was, but he didn't take into account how poorly ventilated the room would be. That's why the fire didn't consume the entire room like he probably hoped it would. Chambers gestured to the burnt edges of the comforter preserved in the evidence photos, the scorched mattress beneath it, and the blackened ceiling above the bed. The fire's focus is deliberate. She was his target, so that's where he concentrated the flames. In his mind, the flames weren't just about hiding evidence, they were a symbolic way of obliterating her. Rage and logic meshed together, Simmons added, leaning back in her chair. He wanted to eliminate every physical trace of her existence, but he lacked the expertise to pull it off. Gasoline, the killer's tool of choice. One of the first major red flags for investigators was the discovery of gasoline residue on the mattress and surrounding areas. Forensics confirmed that gasoline, rather than something more spontaneous like an ignited curtain or faulty electrical wiring, had been used to initiate the blaze. This was damning evidence of arson. He brought the gas with him, Simmons said during a briefing. That's what concerns me most. He didn't just grab something lying around the house after the attack, he came prepared, which means the fire was part of his plan all along. Or at least part of his panic-fueled plan when things escalated, Chambers countered. Don't get me wrong, I agree, it shows intent. But I think the fire tells us he didn't expect things to spiral the way they did. Killing her was impulsive. The fire? That was his way of wiping the slate clean afterward. Tracking Christopher's purchases in the days leading up to the murder revealed a potentially critical piece of evidence. He had bought a small gas canister from a local convenience store 2 nights before the crime. Surveillance footage showed Christopher paying for the item, anxiously glancing out the windows multiple times as the cashier rang him up. This right here, Simmons said, using her pen to tap the time-stamped gas can purchase slip, is what sealed Sarah's fate. He wasn't buying gas for his car. He had something much darker in mind. The killer's motive for arson. While the fire's immediate goal of evidence destruction was apparent, Detectives began to question if Christopher's decision to set the blaze also carried deeper psychological undertones. According to criminal behavior specialist Dr. Margaret Lane, who helped provide insight into Christopher's actions, the fire symbolized something far more personal. Arson in intimate crimes like this goes beyond covering tracks, Dr. Lane explained. It's about control, anger, and an overwhelming need to eradicate the person or what they represent. Christopher didn't just want Sarah dead, he wanted her reduced to ashes. In his mind, the flames weren't just for protection, they were retaliation. That fits, Simmons remarked after reviewing Lane's assessment. He thought Sarah had destroyed his life, taken everything from him. The fire might have felt like some twisted form of justice in his mind. He wasn't just getting rid of her, he was destroying the power she held over him. A flawed plan, but the plan wasn't without its flaws. In many ways, Christopher underestimated the practical challenges of arson. Flames need oxygen to spread effectively, and the enclosed nature of the bedroom limited their ability to consume the room fully. While parts of the mattress and bed were incinerated, much of the surrounding evidence, including traces of accelerant and even some personal items like Sarah's jewelry, remained intact. He probably thought the fire would do all the work, Chambers mused. But this isn't Hollywood. Fires are messy. They don't magically erase everything like in the movies. Even more incriminating were the burn patterns left behind. Arson investigators noted that the flames followed the direction of the poured gasoline, creating distinct scorch trails leading back to Christopher's point of ignition. Footprints left near the source were also partially preserved in the soot, a mistake that tied him directly to the act. Honestly, the fire gave away more than it destroyed, Simmons admitted during another team debrief. If he hadn't said it, we might have missed some of the physical evidence, but the accelerant residue, the footprint trails, that's the kind of stuff you can't hide with flames. The psychological breakdown, why arson? To fully understand Christopher's choice to set the fire, detectives turned again to his mental and emotional state leading up to the crime. Months of perceived depression and unresolved anger bubbled over that night, leading him to lash out not only with violence but with arson, a symbolic act that reflected both his rage and his desperation. Arson is a tool for people who feel powerless, Dr. Lane explained in a follow-up meeting with the investigative team. Christopher probably felt like his life had spiraled completely out of his control. The fire was intended to give him that sense of control back. It's a way to rewrite the story, to assert dominance over something he believed was bigger than himself. So what? He wanted to be the director of this whole thing? The fire was his grand finale? Simmons asked skeptically. Exactly, Dr. Lane confirmed, but his anger clouded his judgment. He wanted to be the one in control but didn't have the skill or forethought to fully pull it off. That's why the fire failed. It came from a place of panic and anger, not planning. Christopher's admission. During his eventual confession, Christopher admitted how the fire became his fallback plan after the murder. I didn't know what else to do, he had stammered under questioning, his voice shaking with tears. It just all happened so fast. I didn't go there planning to kill her, but after it happened I panicked. I thought if I burned it down, no one would know what I did. A fire doesn't stop us from finding answers, Christopher, Simmons had countered sharply. You know that now, don't you? Christopher had nodded weakly, overcome by the weight of his failures. Not only in execution but in the realization that his attempt to burn Sarah's memory from existence had done precisely the opposite. Instead of erasing his actions, the fire brought attention, evidence, and ultimately, his arrest. Everything I did, he whispered during questioning, staring down at his shaking hands, just made it worse. Lessons from the flames. For detectives working on Sarah Mitchell's case, the evidence left behind by the failed arson attempt spoke volumes about Christopher's character. A man consumed by bitterness and a misguided belief that fire could cleanse his mistakes. But instead of erasing the past, it illuminated a trail of guilt that led directly back to him. In a way, Simmons reflected after reviewing the case, the fire tells us more about Christopher than the murder itself. It's desperate, sloppy, and full of rage. It's who he is, right there in the burn marks. Chambers nodded. It's ironic, really. For someone who wanted Sarah erased, what he left behind guarantees she'll never be forgotten. And that was the ultimate truth of the fire. While it destroyed pieces of evidence and left scars in its wake, it ultimately lit the path to justice. For Sarah Mitchell's family, friends, and community, the flames that Christopher set would forever symbolize not his power but his failure, and their resilience. The final verdict. The courtroom was packed. Every inch of the gallery, every available seat outside the jury box was filled. The trial of Christopher White had become the town's singular focus, a morbid fascination driven by the brutal murder of Sarah Mitchell and the harrowing details of the failed arson attempt that followed. For weeks, whispers of the trial buzzed through the streets, in cafes, at community gatherings. Everyone had their theories, their observations. But now, as the case reached its crescendo, the weight of justice hung heavy over the proceedings. Detective Laura Simmons sat quietly in the back row of the courtroom, her arms folded, her notepad resting unused in her lap. Beside her, Detective Elliot Chambers leaned slightly forward, his arms on his knees as he stared at Christopher's slouched figure at the defense table. The weeks of digging through evidence, questioning witnesses, and unearthing the psychological motivations of Christopher White had led to this moment, and no one, not the prosecution, the defense, or the community, expected it to be anything less than emotional. Chambers leaned slightly toward Simmons. "Nervous?" he asked quietly, even though he knew the answer. She shook her head but didn't look at him. "No, just tired of waiting. We know he's guilty, Elliot, everyone knows it. I just want to hear the words out loud." He nodded. "You and me both." The prosecution's case. The prosecution had constructed a crushingly effective case. They laid out the evidence with chilling precision, every piece fitting into a narrative of anger, premeditation, and desperation. The matching boot print on the windowsill, the gas canister purchased 2 days before the crime, the surveillance footage of Christopher dumping Sarah's phone, the fragments of data recovered from the phone itself, and most damning of all, Christopher's own confession, painstakingly recorded during interrogation. Sarah's friends, family, and colleagues testified one by one. They painted a picture not just of her warmth and her resilience but also of her professional toughness. They spoke of the rivalries she had faced in the business world, the resentment felt by some, though none dared to suggest she deserved what happened. Mostly they shared stories of Sarah's kindness, her connections with the community, the personal ways she touched people's lives. One of the most difficult testimonies came from Robert Mitchell, Sarah's son, who lived in the same house. His voice trembled as he described waking up to the smell of smoke, rushing to find flames licking up the stairs, and realizing his mother was still upstairs. His pain was palpable, and as he stared across the courtroom at Christopher, his anger burned quietly beneath his grief. "You didn't just take my mother from me," Robert said, facing Christopher directly during his testimony. His voice cracked mid-sentence, but he pushed forward, undeterred. "You tried to destroy everything she was, but you failed, Christopher, you failed miserably." The prosecution closed with finality, leaving little room for doubt. "This trial is not about emotion," the lead prosecutor said in their closing argument. "It is about facts. And the facts are overwhelming. Christopher White didn't just murder Sarah Mitchell. He planned it, executed it, and then tried to erase it with fire. But his actions left a trail. That trail led him straight to this courtroom." The defense. The defense's attempts to counter the mountain of evidence were weak at best. When Christopher took the stand, a decision that surprised even his own legal team, his testimony only cemented the perception of guilt. He described his anger towards Sarah, how her actions had ruined his life, how he only wanted to talk to her that night. But under cross-examination, his story unraveled. "You brought gasoline to Sarah's house that night," the prosecutor reminded him. Christopher stammered. It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to. You broke into her house through the second-story window. I didn't think she'd let me in, I just wanted to." "You stabbed her, repeatedly, 30 times, is that correct?" I was scared, okay? She said horrible things to me. I lost control. And after losing control, you then retrieved the gasoline and set her body on fire in an attempt to erase what you'd done. Is that accurate?" Christopher's voice faltered. "Yes." The gallery sat in silence as the prosecutor drove home the point. "You didn't lose control, Mr. White. You made choices. Every step of the way, you made deliberate choices. To bring the gas, to force entry, to stab her over and over, to set the fire. Don't call that losing control." Christopher's head bowed as the prosecutor turned to face the jury. Choices define guilt, and Mr. White made every possible choice to leave Sarah Mitchell and this town in ashes. The jury's deliberation. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, though it felt like an eternity to those waiting in the courtroom. Simmons and Chambers didn't talk much as they sat outside the courthouse, sipping lukewarm coffee from a vendor's cart. "You think they'll come back with the death penalty?" Simmons asked, staring blankly at the courthouse steps. Chambers shrugged. It's Massachusetts, Laura. Most juries shy from it, but this case, the fire, the overkill, I wouldn't be surprised. She nodded, unconvinced. He got angry, lost it, and now he'll try to play the victim for the rest of his life. It's exhausting to even think about. This case was always going to be exhausting, Chambers replied. But it's also about Sarah, about Robert, about the people she left behind. Closure for them, not for him. The verdict. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom hushed as the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. The gallery leaned in, holding their collective breath. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Christopher White, guilty. Murmurs rippled through the room as people exchanged glances and sighs of relief, but the foreman wasn't done. On the charge of arson in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. The judge nodded solemnly, thanked the jury, and proceeded to review the sentencing recommendation. Simmons and Chambers sat still, watching Christopher. He didn't flinch, didn't cry, he simply stared ahead at the table, pale and silent. Whether it was defeat, regret, or mere exhaustion, no one could tell. The judge finally spoke, her voice firm and clear. Christopher White, for the murder of Sarah Mitchell and the attempted destruction of evidence by arson, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The finality of that statement hung in the charged air of the courtroom. Simmons exhaled deeply, feeling relief wash over her. It's done, she said, turning to Chambers. Finally, it's done. Not for Robert, Chambers said thoughtfully. It's never really done for the victims. Simmons nodded slowly. No, but maybe now they can start healing. Aftermath. Outside the courthouse, Robert Mitchell stood under the bright spring sun, surrounded by reporters and cameras. He spoke briefly, his voice steady despite the whirlwind around him. Today's verdict won't bring my mom back, but it will give us a chance to move forward. I hope everyone who loved her can find peace knowing that justice was served. Back in their car, Simmons turned to Chambers as he started the ignition. It's over, right? Chambers glanced at her briefly before focusing on the road. Yeah, it's over. At least this part. As they drove away, the courthouse grew smaller in the rearview mirror, a testament to the grueling weeks they had spent chasing answers, uncovering a killer's motives, and ensuring that a significant life would not be forgotten. Justice had been served, but like all cases etched in fire and rage, its memory would endure, leaving scars, for this town, for Sarah's family, and for the two detectives who had fought so hard to bring the truth to light.